I want to understand and I want to agree with what you've said before regarding your making no distinction between physical dependence and addiction. But when I hear physical dependence, I'm thinking of withdrawal, like sweating, flu symptoms, or worse in the case of drinking or benzodiazepines. There must be some distinction between what's physical and what's psychological at this stage, right? Or am I overthinking something?
Well, that's a good question. When your body readjusts to something, it's now called a pathological concept of withdrawal. As I write about in my book, The Meaning of Addiction, everything that has an effect on your nervous system has a reaction when you stop taking it. Um, and there's no distinction. At one point, there's no, that distinction used to be made between addictive drugs and physically. DSM and pharmacology doesn't use terms like physical dependence themselves anymore because it's too global. You can't ever tell, well, why are they reacting to eliminating a painkiller, or why do some people react so extremely to it and others don't? It can't ever be defined in simple terms as one thing or another. And then I would ask this questioner, have you ever withdrawn, or have you ever known anybody who's withdrawn from a love relationship? Have you ever known anybody who felt they couldn't endure going on in life and they killed themselves? Nobody ever, hardly anybody in the history of the world has killed themselves when they quit smoking or even quit a heroin addiction or quit cocaine. It's the largest source of suicide. Love addiction is the largest source of suicide and murder in America. And so there's a list of things that people take compulsively and negatively. And it's things that are extremely engaging that overwhelm your overall experience. And things like that, when people quit and they've been addicted to, tend to create a commonality of a response. And yet we don't notice that when people leave a hospital. You know, Norman Zinberg was the first person to say, people don't say when they leave a hospital, even if they've been on a really powerful anesthetic narcotic for 8 days or 10 days or 20, they don't say, I was going through withdrawal when they come home. Yeah. They say, oh, you know, I got out of the hospital and I came home. I'm really glad to come home. And they give them some other painkiller, you know, which is obviously 1,000 times less than what they were getting in an IV infusion. So all of these things are gradated. They're a standard part of taking anything that powerfully affects the central nervous system. And love and sex, nothing affects the central nervous system more than those things. And afterwards, there's a readjustment. And for what it's worth, the opponent process model that Richard Solomon describes says that every powerful experience has a powerful after effect. And he likened love, he threw love into that category. So those distinctions between things that are caused physically and psychologically cannot be maintained. They can never be distinguished one from the other. You can't describe things that cause physical dependence and things that don't cause physical dependence. You can't describe addiction, why people are committed to something, or why they have more or less severe withdrawal based on some imagined kind of physical versus some other kind of response. It can't be done. And it's a fool's errand to do it. And everybody knows it can't. Pharmacologists know it can't be done. And that's why, so they keep writing things like, so you'll read things back to the 50s where they say, the object of distinguishing between physical and psychological dependence is a fool's errand. There's no human way or scientific way of determining that.
So let me take it here, and then we'll have 10 minutes for one more question. But Jordan Peterson and his daughter keep making this distinction all the time. People watching this, maybe this is not linked to it, but we just did a talk about Jordan Peterson and how he had benzodiazepine withdrawals and an addiction to it. And they keep saying, no, he wasn't addicted to it. He was physically dependent on him. So that's a distinction that you would say is a little bit misguided.
And what's the difference? He was physically dependent. So he's saying he wasn't addicted to benzodiazepines.
Right.
So then why did he want to quit them then?
Right. that was my question earlier on. It's like, if they were working for you and you think that they're great, then why do you want to quit them again? I mean, he was taking them despite the fact that whether it's true or not, he took benzodiazepines despite what he thought they were causing him tremors and horrible anxiety, and he kept taking them. So then he wanted to stop.
I always point out to people, it means nothing to them. DSM-4 did away with the concept of addiction, and it only used the term dependence. I don't want to depress people, but DSM-5 doesn't use the term addiction or dependence.
Right.
Because it doesn't get you anywhere, except, and there should be a footnote in DSM-5. I was actually a contributor on the advisory council of DSM-4, but I've gone downhill. They didn't consult me with DSM-5. The only thing that it's called substance use and behavioral addiction disorders. Only one thing in the DSM-5 only identifies one thing in the universe as addictive, and it's not heroin, alcohol, cocaine, and cigarettes. The word addiction, it's gambling. Addictive, so, apropos of your first question, and they don't use the term, they don't use the term dependence. It's just too misleading. All the concepts that have, when we wrote Love and Addiction, a good friend of her sister was a psychiatrist, and she said, we wrote Love and Addiction was published in 1975. Well, medicine knows what addiction is. We've gone completely backwards now. And as I pointed out in another one of our blog posts, only within the last couple of months has Wikipedia changed its definition of addiction from being a brain disease to being something that's much broader than that. We're always seeing addiction being redefined. And with all due modesty, getting on to 50 years after Archie and I wrote Love and Addiction, the definition that they're coming up with for addiction is looking more and more all the time like the one that we had in 1975.